You know, it's been quite a while since I've covered some actual history here on YouTube. Well, it's also been quite a while since I've uploaded a video to YouTube as well. 3 words. Lots of deadlines. Lots and lots and lots of deadlines. So let's talk about something historical and something very niche, very much my bread and butter. So here, without further ado, are the Russian hipsters that history has forgotten. The Stilyaga. Stilyagi? Stilyaga? One of the ones. When you think of the Soviet Union past World War II, sorry, Great Patriotic War, but pre the death of Stalin, you don't really think of madly dressed teenagers. You just imagine starving people all being bossed about and sent to the Gulag. And while that is sadly quite true, some of the young people that had survived the Great Patriotic War wanted to try out some of the Western culture they had experienced briefly in Europe. While Stalin's time in office had largely been fairly culturally uneventful, the 40s in the Western world had brought about things like swing and big band music, and artists like Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman ruled the world. And by the end of the 40s, Russian teenagers had discovered this music and really gotten into it. They loved Glenn Miller and the film Sun Valley Serenade, which his music features in prominently. And even bigger than the music was the style that went with it. Whatever cool Western stuff they could look at, they would try and copy. Anything that looked a little bit different from the state-issued standard Soviet garb was highly sought after. Using black market goods imported by what were then called the fartsovka, this is like the 3rd or 4th take where I've not corpsed my way through that line, they could dress how they wanted. They were hunting for style. They were style hunters, or Stilyagi in Russian. I feel like it goes without saying, but not every teen at the time was a Stilyaga, in the same way that there were only a few hundred proper real punks in London during the height of the 70s. It was a small thing, but there was enough for the Soviet government to take notice, but we'll get to that in a minute. They also had their own slang, because of course they did, I'm talking about it. The ones listed on the Russian Wikipedia page are telling of their social attitudes. Lots of stuff on fashion, lots of stuff on sex, and of course at least one term about the domestic products of light industry. One thing that's really great about this story is on Russian Google Images, there are tons and tons of Stilyagi pictures. And because it's the Soviet Union during the 50s, copyright didn't exist, so I can show you all of them. Look at these people. They look like they're having fun in the Soviet Union. How? Love that guy especially. I want those sunglasses. I want to look like that one day. Instead, I wear this blue jumper and look like a fool. The Stilyagi were also very into pirating music. In fact, they're probably one of the biggest early efforts of pirating music. In the Soviet Union, you obviously couldn't just buy American records, at least in the late 40s, early 50s. You needed to get it imported, which was costly and dangerous, or pick up some sort of bootleg copy somehow. Get this. Using modified gramophones, underground sound engineers found a way of duplicating vinyl records, like this one, onto used X-ray sheets. That's right, records made out of old X-rays. Anyone who thinks they had it bad with cassette tapes, or worse, only having YouTube for listening to music on, have literally nothing to complain about. That being said, I don't want to downplay how impressive it is to even come up with something like that. I'm in awe, it's incredible. And it also went hand in hand with samizdat, which was this practice of doing basically the same thing, but with books instead. Very tempted to do a whole episode on that, so keep posted. Unlike a lot of teenaged protest groups, there wasn't a political message going along with the Stilyaga. After seeing all the war and the famine and all the horrible stuff that had dominated Stalin's time in charge, they had no ideology. Nothing. Well, I say that. The one thing they had was standing out from the crowd. As you can imagine, Stalin wouldn't have been too keen on this. I couldn't find any evidence to suggest that he knew about it personally, but given his track record, I somehow doubt he'd be a big fan of anyone with an opinion other than his roaming the streets of Leningrad. To be fair, anyone having an opinion would be bad enough. The Soviet Komsomols, which are the Communist Party groups for young people, were asked to put a stop to it. So they started expelling any openly Stilyaga Soviet citizens and kicked them out of uni. Yeah, that's right. Wearing the wrong clothes and looking like this could get you kicked out of a Soviet uni. How lucky do we have it in England? Even worse, they were said to have deliberately attacked groups of them in public, forcibly cutting their hair and ripping up their clothes as a means to discredit them. The Soviet press also ridiculed their desire for Americana. The term Stilyaga is actually a Soviet press invention as well. One famous 50s headline in Pravda read, "Today he plays jazz, tomorrow he sells our homeland." Stalin's government actually did a lot to try and stop people from spreading pesky subversive music. Stilyaga and the jazz music they listened to were considered part of an American cosmopolitan plot by the authorities that could potentially destroy the Soviet Union. Anyone caught making bone music or playing it in public would usually be sent to prison, and if they weren't ridiculed by the press, they were scrutinised and harassed in public. So all power to them for trying to keep it going. But then rather suddenly, things changed. As you may be aware, Stalin died, and eventually Khrushchev became the new leader of the Soviet Union. As this began to happen, culture began to thaw, which is where some, by no means all bans on media, became relaxed. Definitely nothing controversial or thought-provoking, but jazz was suddenly deemed okay in the Union. Also, fashion became slightly less rigidly enforced, and young people had a bit more choice about what they could wear. Most importantly, thanks to a slight easing on restrictions, they could copy styles from the outside world a bit more easily, and the Stilyaga started to disappear and fade into the rest of society. That, and also by the time this happened, the original Stilyaga would have been pushing 30, and they probably quite like to live a normal life by now. Stilyaga had a massive influence on everything that came after it. Bone music was eventually superseded by magnetizdat, which was essentially a network of tape copying, which was used by many of the big bands of the late period of the Soviet Union, like Nautilus Pompilus, Mumi Troll, and Kino. Every so often there's a bit of a revival in the fashion too, much like how we take the mod chic here in England every couple of decades and try and bring it back. Also about 10 years ago there was a jukebox musical about the whole thing. I've not seen it, but apparently it's really good. To close, people end up being a bit rude about fashion, and young people fashion. But sometimes, youth fashion can really mean things. Or it can mean nothing. Or it can mean something that pretends to mean nothing, but actually inadvertently means something. I've run out of things to say now, so let's put that picture of the sunglasses guy back up. Oh no, not jazz!